We're only a short way into Donald Trump's presidency. What is your opinion of how things are going? And has he delivered for Christians so far? We'll talk about that next on Significant Insights. Hello, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us. As a candidate, Donald Trump was among the most controversial figures in recent history. As a president, those controversies continue to follow him. And I think it's safe to say that he is one of the most, if not the most, polarizing presidents, at least in my lifetime. And that's what I'm going to talk about today with my two guests. Julie Roys is the host of the radio program Up for Debate on Moody Radio. She writes for a lot of publications and is a conference speaker as well. And last year, before we voted, Julie hosted an election special TLN aired titled Divided We Vote, Evangelicals and the 2016 Election. Dr. Vincent Bacote is an associate professor of theology and the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College. He teaches courses on political theology and politics and culture, and is the author of The Political Disciple. Thanks for being with me. Good to have you with me on the program. A rather interesting and relevant, controversial topic is Donald Trump, the President of the United States. And it's hard for a lot of people to say President Trump because they have such an antagonism. A lot of evangelicals supported, maybe not even supported, but voted for Donald Trump. Out of that large percentage, a much smaller percentage voted for Donald Trump because they actually supported him, but rather it was a vote against political correctness and the liberal agenda of the Democratic Party. Would you agree with that? How do you see it?
I sort of agree. That's why I would say. And the reason I would say that is because, on the one hand, we had to think about the fact that 40% of the electorate didn't even vote, so nobody even knows what they think. Of the 60% that have voted, then there's that 81% number, which is largely white evangelicals. It's not accounting for ethnic evangelicals, which I think is part of what you were saying. But I think what they did, even if they were voting against Hillary, right, where it would basically take an act of God for them to vote for Hillary Clinton, there's the fact that Trump asked evangelicals, he gave people access that really other Republicans didn't even give them, and said basically, what do you want? And he said, okay, what do you want? I'll give it to you. And there are enough people who thought, at least he'll give us this.
And that came at a time that more and more they were feeling marginalized, and I will include me, that as an evangelical, feeling marginalized by liberal Democrats and feeling more and more alienated and feeling more alienation coming. So it was almost then, to some degree, a defensive type of maneuver. Would you say, Julie?
Well, yeah, and one of the interesting things is that the demographic that really put him over the top were blue-collar whites, right? And that is the one demographic, if you look at especially white men, older white men, that's the one demographic where actually their life expectancies have been going down. I mean, dramatically, even more than where you see other ethnic groups in the same age group, the life expectancies have been going up, but for this one group of people, they've been going down. Alcoholism is up, depression is up, divorce is up. I mean, this is a group of America that's suffering, and yet they're hearing about privilege. They're hearing a lot of things that make them, I think, somewhat justifiably frustrated because they don't feel like that's something they've experienced, even though that might be an experience for other parts of white America. So I do think it was a reaction. I think for Christians, it was a reaction towards really feeling incredibly not just marginalized, but persecuted.
Well, I think for certain, the narrative going into the election was the culture wars have been lost, and that more of what was going to happen as a result of losing cultural influence, having more of a post-Christian culture, or a kind of post-Christian culture, really. That more things were going to get legislated, so putting that cultural transformation into policy. So there was, I mean, and it was being articulated as if, look, culture wars, we've lost, Now just get ready to be brought to heel, particularly around sexuality. The thing I would push back on, though, is I think I agree with you that about the white men and privilege thing because of class things. But I do think it also inflamed in some ways that people are trying to find a reason to be disturbed about things that are more the result of globalization than because of them being privileged. Because it's really the effects of globalization, I would argue, that have put those people into, they've either lost jobs or their pathways to being middle class without having to have a certain kind of college education, that those things were no longer as accessible because of the changes in the, in a post-industrial economy. And then of course you're looking for some way to understand why is this happening. Now, to some degree, there was the progressivism, but the fact is that your far progressives thought Obama wasn't progressive enough. So they thought he was too centrist, and still, hey, you bailed out the banks. You're in favor of Wall Street, and Trump ran against Hillary as her being the establishment candidate, which nobody would have ever thought in the 90s. So in some ways, I think that's a complicating factor in part of what's going on.
Let's approach it from a different direction. What do you think would have happened if Cruz or Rubio
That's an interesting question.
would have been the candidate? Would they? I'm not sure they would have won.
I don't know. It's really hard to know. They certainly would not have galvanized that segment of the population the way that Trump did. At the same time, I wonder, conventionally speaking, I thought, wow, if Republicans had just put forward a candidate who was legitimate against Hillary, who was so flawed in so many ways and had so many ties to even possible illegal activities, they would have blown it out of the water. So to me, either they would have done really, really well, even better than they did, or they wouldn't have done as well and they could have it's really hard to tell. But the thing that kind of scares me about that is that I hear a lot of the Christian community saying, in fact, I heard Pastor Jeffress, pastor of a large megachurch in Texas.
He was a very good friend of mine.
And I'm sure he's a wonderful person. I don't know him personally.
He is. I'm not sure some of them.
But he said, and this was during the campaign, he said, I don't want a candidate that embodies the teachings of Jesus Christ. I want the meanest son of a you-know-what that we can get when we're dealing with ISIS and all these other threats. And I thought to myself, that is a shocking statement. We're Christians. We believe that someday Jesus is going to come back, not just as a spiritual ruler, but as a political ruler. And don't we as Christians want everyone, especially our leaders, to act in a Christ-like way? But I think there's this belief, and I'm seeing it embraced by a lot of evangelicals, that to deal with what we have to deal with now, as nasty as the Democrats are, as nasty as the left, the progressive, as ISIS, as all of our enemies are, that we have to be even meaner than they are. We have to stoop to their level, and that's how we win. And you're hearing it even with the recent threats by Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And Trump comes out and says, boy, we're going to hit you with fire and fury, right? He's sounding like a despot from North Korea is what he sounds like. But then you're hearing a lot of Christians saying, and Jeffress came out and said, God gave Trump the authority to take Kim Jong-un out. And I'm like, really?
A pretty bad use of Romans 13.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it is. And I think that it is incredibly dangerous for Christians to get that close and to that fully embrace political power.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the difficulty of the current circumstance is, some of the people that people keep talking about, Jeffress, Jerry Falwell Jr., et cetera, none of them, for all their prominence, have ever been the people that have been central to driving the ideas of public evangelicalism, right? So I think we need to recognize that part. They're getting a lot of attention that they weren't getting brought in a broad way.
Yeah.
That they're getting that now that they weren't getting 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when there were other names that people thought of primarily as identifying with being evangelical leaders. So I think we need to recognize that part and see that there's a kind of anomalous nature to what they're saying. I also think, though, that part of the difficulty is knowing how to be politically engaged and politically engaged in a wise way. And also thinking about long term, okay, what is your public messaging here? Because there is a generational divide of sorts, and probably not even strictly generation, probably even the same generation. People are thinking, see, this is the reason why I think we were wrong to get so involved in politics in the first place, because the temptations of power are too seductive for us. To which my response is, yes, there's a great seduction there, which is why you want people of high character engaging in these situations of tremendous responsibility and power. So I think this is why we need more of the right kind of people to be involved in politics. Because it's making some people, I think, cynical about politics and cynical about evangelicals in politics.
There's more with my guest right after the break.
The point is that exposes something about, I think, the nature of political participation being about antagonizing rather than constructing something.
Thank you for watching. The program you just watched is made possible by viewers like you. We would like to thank you for your continued support. To donate, please go to tln.com/donate or call us at 630-801-3857.
Welcome back. Today I'm having a very interesting discussion with Up for Debate radio host Julie Roys and Wheaton College professor Dr. Vincent Bacote about President Donald Trump's first several months in office. You wrote a blog on his tweeting.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, I think what's so distressing to me is that evangelicals seem to be covering for him when he acts really horribly. And so when I wrote that blog, it was interesting even just to see the kind of responses I got from followers. You know, hey, Jesus drove out the money changers and he called them whitewashed tombs. So
well, I
Trump's
get
not
the same
doing any
thing
worse
every
than
time.
that.
Every time I write something, and look, I see some positive things that are happening in this administration. Underneath all the stuff and the tweets that drive me nuts, he's not a good speaker. Every time he gives a speech, I want to turn it off because he won't stay on script, and that bothers me and it's frustrating. But underneath it all, I see some things that really are happening that
So
are
what are
pretty
the
good.
things you
But
see?
every time I
what
write
besides Gorsuch do you see?
the what?
What besides Gorsuch do you see?
I don't know.
he's befriended, I mean, I think Gorsuch was huge. I mean, that's,
But
when you talk about white
that's
people
why
voting.
that's why I think he's got the approval rating, because
Gorsuch
he
was the-
delivered on that thing way
delivered
faster
on that- he
than
delivered on that
any
promise.
other candidate delivered.
He is moving ahead on immigration. There has to be something done with immigration. Where how far they go with this.
Let's not remember the nickname for Obama was Deporter in Chief. So you look at the numbers of the people that Barack Obama sent away. So let's be clear that when we're talking about something being done on immigration, that there were things that Obama did in terms of sending a lot of people away.
In fact, I think, as a matter of fact, he deported more people than any president
yes.
prior to him.
Exactly. So my only point is that yes, there are things he's doing about immigration, but let's not act like Obama was like opening the gates, because he wasn't.
But he did have the whole extending amnesty to the children.
Well, okay, but if you're deporting all these people, I think there's a whole question about, from a political point of view and from a practical point of view, what are you going to do in this situation? I mean, that is a difficult political circumstance.
But I think, what was it, around 200,000 or so, but at the same time they were wanting to bring in another 100,000 or so refugees, most of whom, if you look at all of the pictures and of the immigrants that are coming into most of these countries, men 35 years and younger, in Sweden, in Germany, in all these places, and you look at that and you see the massive problems that this is creating. Who was it? The chancellor in Germany said it may be inevitable. We may become Muslim at some point because of the trends and what's happening.
Well, that's because
so some sort of immigration plan, I think,
yes.
is absolutely essential. But going back to your tweets, I think you ought to have his tweeter taken away from him.
Well, I wish they would. But the thing is, with the tweets, as much as I hate them just because I hate the tone of them, and I don't like speaking that way. I don't think there's anything beneficial to it. But it's become this huge distraction. I mean, here we are dealing with real issues like North Korea, like ISIS, like the economy, like Obamacare, which we thought was going to be repealed and we haven't been able to do anything with, like tax reform, which is something that we have to do. I mean, and that's going to drive the economy, which the economy is looking better. That's good. But it's not going to continue if something isn't done. But what are we talking about? We're talking about tweets. You know, just the other day we were talking about the senator that apparently didn't serve in Vietnam, so he's tweeting about that. And we're not talking about real issues.
He was tweeting about a beauty queen.
but I think this goes to your point about this is, we said we got what you would expect. I mean, he's always been this kind of person. So none of this should surprise us. Nor should it surprise us, by the way, with somebody with zero political experience doing this in office. So, I mean, there has to be something said about the fact that, he said, when he met with Obama and he's getting a sense of the scope of the job, that he was really surprised at the scope of the job. So to me, it was kind of telling that he said that. Now, part of what I'm hopeful for is that in spite of everything that's happened, that I would say in spite of what I call the roulette wheel character of this administration, because you never know where the ball is going to land, I'm hopeful that somehow, in spite of everything, the concerns we're talking about here, that the nature of the office will to some degree in time, because the first year isn't even over, to some degree in time temper some of these things.
Well, the thing that I think a lot of us keep hoping is that he will listen to the experts around him, because one of his promises, if you recall, was that he was going to hire the best people available. He's been through 4 or 5 of those best people available. And hopefully Kelly will be a person that he listens to, because I think part of it, and Julie, there are people who are saying, ease up on the tweets, or if you do a tweet, make it civil. Yeah. Don't keep creating these issues that the media can rip you apart on. Let's get to the big agenda. Mm-hmm. Tax reform, huge. The Affordable Care Act, huge.
I think let me just say something about the Affordable Care. I think to me, one thing that was exposed about that is, like, if Republicans are going to spend 7 or 8 years talking about opposing the president under the ACA, and the fact is that even Democrats know that the ACA has a lot of problems. If you get majorities, and all of a sudden it's like you never had a plan except to oppose. It's like nobody was creating anything when you get your turn, and then all of a sudden you get your turn and you can't do anything. You can't find a way to have some kind of consensus about it. The point is that exposes something about, I think, the nature of political participation being about antagonizing rather than constructing something.
Well, would you agree something's going to have to happen before the midterm election?
Yes.
Or
if they don't
there
get
could
tax
be some-
reform and they don't get anything with the Affordable Care
So
Act, they're sunk.
I say sort of, because the Democrats have shown that their house isn't exactly in order either.
It's true.
And I mean, it's a newsworthy item in the recent week that there's conversation about what it means if you're a Democrat and you don't make it prominent that you're pro-choice, because and for some people, they're scandalized by
Well,
the
no,
fact
they're
that
saying kick them out.
exactly. But the point is that this is coming out, a month or two after you have this public speech by the head of the DNC saying, really pushing hard left on that part, that the one thing we're going to stand for is abortion rights. But I think one of the things they recognize is that when it comes to getting people elected, okay, that's not what you need to be leading with if you're going to try to get elected in most places.
More with my guests right after this.
I don't think politics can change the culture. We have lost, in many ways, this culture. And the culture wars, I don't think the fact that Trump won is any indication that we haven't lost the culture wars, but we need to, as an evangelical church, we need to win this culture.
TLN is a donor-supported station, and Programs like you just watched are made possible by viewers like you. To donate, please go to tln.com/donate or call us at 630-801-3857.
Welcome back. Today, writer, speaker, blogger, and up for debate radio host Julie Roys and Wheaton College professor Dr. Vincent Bacote and I have been talking about the first season of Donald Trump's presidency, and we conclude our conversation in today's final thoughts.
I don't think politics can change the culture. We have lost, in many ways, this culture. And the culture wars, I mean, I don't think the fact that Trump won is any indication that we haven't lost the culture wars, but we need to, as an evangelical church, we need to win this culture. And if we don't win this culture, we may have stayed, some of the, as Chuck Colson said, politics is one of the institutions that can stop the moral decline, but it doesn't have the power to regenerate culture.
That has to happen in the heart.
It's happening in the heart, but it also has to be Christians being encouraged to be culturally formative in a lot of these small areas that aren't immediately,
But it's not a political thing.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
Through the
church. I'm talking about the people in the church who are formed by their churches, whose churches encourage them to, in law, in medicine, in education, in television, in the arts.
But the problem
down the line, the point is that churches are encouraging those people to be culturally formative.
But those people don't have a Christian worldview.
Well, no.
Barna says, bless them one and
I'm
five.
talking about the fact
we have morphed into our next show. We're talking about Trump and
but this is connected to the Trump part about the what Julie's saying. Another way to say it is politics is downstream from culture. I mean, if evangelicals basically abandoned the culture from like 1929 until maybe the mid-70s, and even that was contested until the 90s, when you get something like a consensus about evangelicals thinking we should be involved in Hollywood, we should be involved in D.C. in politics. And the point is that you leave the culture to other people to form for over half a century, they're going to take the bus where they want to go. Exactly. And then you start telling people, well, maybe you should, but only evangelize. And eventually you get around telling some of them that you should be thinking about taking leadership and creativity in those things. It hasn't even been really 20 years since we've been doing that. So the point is that we need to be encouraging people with a deep Christian formation. So obviously the worldview piece,
strong biblical worldview.
That's happening, and helping, and then encouraging them. Look, you take that into your work in finance. You take that into what you do in education. You take that into law, and you think about the fact that it's not counter to God to be somebody who takes leadership, not just in the Christian culture within your field, but the person that wants to be formative in the larger cultures of all of those domains, and not in a triumphalistic way, but in a way where you're a participant and you're setting an agenda for that, or helping to set that agenda, and we're not encouraging enough people to do that.
Thank you very much for being with me on the program. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Keep your blogs coming.
Yeah, we'll do.
Julie Roy's program, Up for Debate, airs on Moody Radio Saturdays, 11 a.m. through noon Central Time. And you can get Dr. Vince Bacote's book, The Political Disciple, online wherever books are sold. The Bible tells us leadership is appointed by God, and in another place that we should support leadership, especially in our prayers. I was gratified when a group of evangelicals went to Washington to pray for the President of the United States. They received a lot of criticism, but that's scriptural. They should have. If you're called by the President to come pray, why wouldn't you go to Washington and pray for the President? So I appreciate that. And I think that we as Christians need to put it in perspective what our command is as Christians, and that is to understand that whatever we think about it, God has put them in place. And number two, that we support leadership, especially with our prayers. And I think it's important we get that perspective, especially in this polarizing climate that we're seeing today, to really realize who we are as Christians and look at the biblical injunction and then act accordingly. Thanks for joining me. God bless you. See you next time.